All right. Well, it looks like most folks have connected to audio. Might just give it a couple more seconds here to let folks connect to audio.
Here.
See if anybody else joins. They've got some folks still. Good afternoon. Thank you all so much for being here. I think most folks, Jen asked, is there audio yet? And hopefully, Jan, you can hear. I hope everybody has connected to audio as they need. So with that, we'll just go ahead and get started. Melissa, if other folks jump in, you can just go ahead and admit them, and we'll get started. I know everybody's very busy, so I want to be sensitive to your time today. So my name is Lindy Conover Thompson. I am the grant coordinator for this program. Joining us today are Susan Feller, the president and CEO of ATOM, Melissa Brott, the director of programs, and Jessica Cordes, the projects manager for ATOM. And we are so glad to have you with us today. Thank you so much for taking part of your busy afternoon, your busy day to be with us and learn a little bit more about this program. With that, I'm going to share my screen and we will get started with our webinar. So just to make sure you are in the right place, today's webinar is the pre-application webinar for the Sustaining the Humanities Through the American Rescue Plan, which is an NEH subgrant program. This program is offered by the Association of Tribal Archives, Libraries, and Museums, or ATOM. And this is a subgrant program supported by the National Endowment for the Humanities, or the NEH. Again, we are so glad to have you here. So I just want to cover a little bit of housekeeping and navigation. First, we ask that you please remain on mute unless you've been asked to unmute to ask a question. This just helps to ensure that we have good sound quality for all of our participants. If you accidentally become unmuted and it interferes with the sound, one of our moderators will probably mute you. So next, I welcome any questions that you have. We want you to be able to get as much as you can out of this webinar. You can pop your questions in the chat. In order to access the chat bar, you'll just hover over the ribbon at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and you'll see a little word box that says chat. So you just click that, and then the chat box will pop up, and you can type your answers directly into the chat box. Melissa and Jessica are standing by to help answer those questions as they come in. And I will also be taking time in between each of our sections to address, we'll pause and we'll take a look at some of those questions and answer them. If I know that a particular topic or question will be addressed later in the presentation, I will just say, let's put a pin in that or put it in the parking lot for a moment, and we'll advance through the topics. If by the end of the webinar, your question still hasn't been answered, we'll certainly make time to address that. I've set aside some time here at the end of the webinar to address any lingering questions. And finally, the webinar is being recorded, and we'll make sure that this is available to you on the program page on the ATOM website, which we'll navigate here in just a little bit. So with that, let's see, there we go. All right, so here's our agenda. This is a little bit of a roadmap of where we're headed today. So the first thing I will discuss is just a very brief background about ATOM. We will discuss the project purpose and go over the timeline for the program. We'll discuss applicant eligibility and allowable activities. We'll review grantee responsibilities, and then we'll take a look at how to navigate the website and the application, and then open it up for any question or answers that were not addressed. So with that, let's just dive into a little bit of a background about ATOM. So ATOM is an international nonprofit organization that maintains a network of support for Indigenous programs, provides culturally relevant programs and services, encourages collaboration among tribal and non-tribal cultural institutions, and articulates contemporary issues related to developing and sustaining the cultural sovereignty of Native nations. ATOM was incorporated in 2010, but it had been gathering tribal archives, museum, and library leaders since its first conference in 2002. Since then, ATOM has administered many grant programs, hosted an annual conference, and has spearheaded a wide array of programs that support tribal institutions. So here's a little bit about this program. ATOM has received $3.6 million from the National Endowment for the Humanities, or NEH, to help Native cultural organizations recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. ATOM is one of 7 organizations to receive funding through the Sustaining the Humanities through the American Rescue Plan, or SHARP program. ATOM anticipates awarding 175 grants ranging from $5,000 to $50,000. ATOM will fund requests to the fullest extent possible based on the available resources and the competitiveness of applications that were submitted. This grant program was developed in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, which hit the nation's 574 federally recognized tribes particularly hard. The pandemic is not only responsible for the loss of culture keepers, Native language speakers, elders, and government leaders, but also the closure of cultural institutions, as well as the reduction in programming and hours and a loss of staff and income. So in January of 2021, ATOM conducted a nationwide survey of tribal archives, libraries, and museums, asking their staff what they most needed in order to reopen their facilities. The top 3 priorities that these staff members identified were rehiring furloughed staff, ensuring the safety of tribal members, and re-engaging visitors through new programs. So ATOM developed the Humanities Grants for Native Cultural Institutions sub-grant program to respond directly to these most pressing needs. Funds are intended to support cultural organizations that provide humanities programming and who are facing hardships due to the closures and economic impacts related to the pandemic. Grant funds may support operating expenses, salaries, staff retention, and support for in-person or online humanities programs. So now let's just talk a little bit about the project timeline. The application period for this project opened on October 20th, and it will remain open until December 13th. The ATOM staff, including myself, are available for consultation or draft reviews until December 9th. It's important to note that your consultation or draft review by ATOM staff does not guarantee funding for your project. Applications will close on December 13th at 11:59 p.m. Central Time, so be sure to note that. After that, ATOM staff will begin reviewing the applications for completeness, competitiveness, and eligibility. If we recognize any issues or have crucial items that we know will improve your application, we will be sure to provide you with this feedback. Then after you get the feedback, you'll be assigned a 24-hour window where you can go back into your application and make any changes that are necessary. Projects can begin as early as March 1st, 2022, and must be completed by February 28th, 2023. There will be 2 reporting periods. The first one is the 6-month midterm report, which is due on October 1st of 2022, and a final report due on April 1st, 2023. So with that, I am going to open it up for any questions that we have over those topics so far. So let's see here. Jessica is monitoring that. So, and I'm also going to take a look at these as well. Just
kind of, yeah, Lindy. So we had one question from the Wild Center, who is a 501c3, and they have a working relationship with the Six Nations Iroquois Cultural Center. Their private museum in the process of, or the Iroquois National or Cultural Center is in the process of getting a 501c3 status. During this interim time, the Wild Center has agreed to be a fiscal sponsor on grants. Would the Six Nations Museum be eligible for this grant if we acted as a fiscal sponsor submitting the grant?
Okay, so let me just make sure. So the Wild Center is the 501c3. Yes. And the Six Nations Museum is the one that's applying for their 501c3 and has not yet received it.
Correct.
Okay. So the question does not fit neatly into an answer. I see that here in the application. That's a great question, because it does not fit perfectly within one of our 4 funding categories. Susan, do you want to weigh in on this one, since it's a unique question about fiscal sponsors?
Sure, and we're happy to address that individually afterwards. But a lot of that will depend on the people that you're serving. Are they tribal members? So we need to look at your project and how you will be serving Native people before we make that determination, because our goal here is to get funding to people who are in need of it and who are serving Native populations. And that is a tricky question. So I think that's something that we should address for them individually afterwards.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Susan, for weighing in on that. So if you wanted to, I think this was Nancy. Nancy, if you wanted to send us an email at grants@atalm.com, we could address that a little bit more specifically, because it is sort of a one-off question, and we'd be happy to address that individually. Anybody else who has a particular question about eligibility that doesn't fit into one of the neat categories that we will discuss or that we're discussing right now, just send us an email and we can certainly get into it in a little bit more detail. I see that we have the next question is that, do applicants have to be Native or Indigenous led? Again, I think Susan's answer to the last question kind of answers this, which is that if you are not a tribal government or specifically a Native 501c3 organization, then you need to make sure that you're working in partnership with a federally recognized tribe, and that the leadership of your organization is Native led, and that the purpose and mission of your organization is to serve Indigenous peoples. Susan, do you want to add to that?
I think it will be a little bit more flexible than requiring that the leadership of the non-Native organization be Native, as long as they're partnering with a Native organization and have a letter of commitment from that organization, and the purpose of the project is to serve Indigenous populations, then that's fine. Did that answer that question? Clarify it a little bit, I hope.
I hope so. And if not, and if you still need some more clarity, again, just email us at grants@atalm.org and we can talk through that a little bit more. And may a new position be used to qualify an applicant organization for the staff requirement? So I think, Dawn, the question, if I'm understanding it correctly, that you would want to use these funds to hire staff, and that would be your first staff member. If that's the case, that would not be an eligible applicant. You would have to have an existing staff member, at least one staff member first, to make you eligible. And then if you had more staff that you were possibly hiring as part of the project, that could be eligible. But you do have to have at least one paid staff member at the time of application. That didn't answer your question. Again, just send us an email, grants@atalm.com. So the next one from Vanessa Raymond, we're an Indigenous NGO building an online and physical archive of our 50 years representing Inuit locally, regionally, and internationally. Are we eligible for this grant? Again, I would just, if you're 501c3 and you believe that you fit one of these, or if you're not sure, just send us an email and we can talk through that. I do want to be able to address broad questions, but if we did spend all day discussing these individually, we wouldn't be able to get through the webinar. So again, if you have a specific question, about that, or we don't think that, we don't want to take that time, please just email us and we'll be sure to address those individually. And thanks, Melissa, for popping the email in there.
No problem. And I don't know, maybe we want to go ahead and go on with the presentation, and maybe they'll answer some people's questions. And then if they still have that question at the end, we can, during the Q&A time, we can kind of wrap up some of these other questions.
Yes, I think that sounds great. And I'm just seeing here that because a lot of these are getting into idiosyncrasies about this organization. And again, I think those are best addressed one-on-one rather than everybody's time.
Absolutely. And I'll, like I said, grants, I'll pop in the email again. So if anyone has any questions, you can just shoot us an email and we are happy to answer specific questions.
Perfect. All right. So eligible applicants. Again, there are the applicant eligibility generally falls into 4 categories. So that is 1, tribal governments that are operating cultural facilities such as archives, libraries, museums, community centers, arts councils, historical societies, or other organizations that provide humanities and cultural programming. A second eligible applicant would be Native cultural institutions with that 501c3 status. Third is the non-Native cultural institutions with the 501c3 status, working in partnership with a state or federally recognized tribal entity. And fourth, higher education institutions working in partnership with a state or federally recognized tribal entity. So hopefully that does clarify the 4 eligible applicants. And if you're not sure which one you fall into, or if you fall into one, definitely send us an email and we can address that individually with you. Other eligibility requirements that are important to note are that your entity must be USA based. Since this is a federal funds from the United States, they're only allowed to be used, at least in this program, for USA based entities. The grant requires that applicant organizations have at least 1 paid staff member. And applicants must have a DUNS number at the time of application. If you don't have a DUNS number, you can be assigned one for free on the website, which I've listed here, and Melissa can pop in the chat as well. Just to note, you should not have to pay for this. So if you've accidentally somehow navigated to a website that asks you to pay for your DUNS number, you're not in the right place. You want to be sure to look for this Duns & Bradstreet logo on the appropriate website. So I just wanted to let you know that so nobody's getting caught up in a scam. Your organization cannot have received funding from the NEH American Rescue Plan programs. If you're not sure whether or not your organization has received funds from the NEH ARPA plan or SHARP program, you can check by reviewing the list of recipients that Melissa is popping in the chat. And this will also be available on the program website page, which we'll take a look at momentarily. So if you don't catch it right now or you're watching the replay, just know that this list is available to you on the website. Other eligibility requirements are that your project or program activities must fall within one of the following categories: operating expenses, rehiring furloughed employees, retaining current staff, and in-person humanities-based programs or virtual humanities-based programs. Now, I think I'm going to pop over to allowable grant activities. So the important thing to keep in mind here is that the purpose of this program is to help tribal museums, archives, and libraries that have been economically impacted by the pandemic to be able to safely reopen or re-engage the public with humanities-based content. So that's the one thing to keep in mind as you're putting your application together, as you're thinking about your program, is sort of this overarching purpose here. And the good news that we want to share with you is that there are no matching funds required for this grant, which I'm sure we're all very excited about. Tribal cultural institutions can seek funding for the purposes of continuing core function and activities, as well as conducting community outreach programs in areas of history, religion, language, philosophy, literature, arts, and politics. And if you're not sure if a topic falls within the humanities, again, just send us an email at grants@atalm.org and we'll be happy to discuss that with you. Non-tribal institutions can seek funding for the purpose of creating humanities-based public programming in partnership with tribal cultural institutions. Applicants must demonstrate an understanding and appreciation of the rich cultural knowledge and contribution of Indigenous peoples and understand the historical and contemporary issues that affect Indigenous peoples. So with that in mind, I will discuss a few possible types of activities that would be eligible under this grant. First, that would be operations, again, including furloughed employees, controlled entry systems, sanitation stations, signage, and other health measures to keep people safe from the pandemic. Documenting cultural practices, new exhibits and programs as a way of re-engaging the community, and online programming and exhibits. The application does ask you to explain how your organization has been impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, but I want to reiterate that this will be important for you to demonstrate how the activities in your project either help your organization recover from the pandemic or how it will help address the needs brought about by the pandemic. An exhaustive list of funding restrictions can be found in the grant guidelines online, but we're also going to just take a look at a few examples of ineligible activities or funding restrictions. So any overlapping project costs with another pending or approved application for federal funding is ineligible. So in other words, if your proposed project is already being funded with federal dollars, the project would be ineligible under this funding. Pre-award costs that are incurred more than 90 days before the subrecipient's period of performance. So this means that you cannot request funds to reimburse your organization for anything that you've incurred expenses on for more than 90 days before your project starts. So for example, if you are starting your project on March 1st, 2022, you couldn't be reimbursed for anything that was spent prior to December 1st of 2021. So it's the 90-day period. It's important to note that equipment costs cannot exceed 20% of the total project costs. But I do want to draw your attention to the distinction here between equipment and supplies and materials. So equipment is considered a single item that is $5,000 or more. And
Did she freeze for other people?
Yes, she did.
She did. I could not tell if it was me.
I don't hear anything.
Me too, that's why I asked.
Just you. Okay, looks like she might have gotten kicked off really quick. Okay, 1 second. I'm sure she'll pop right back in.
While we wait on her to get back, should we answer a few questions?
Sure, absolutely. So one of the questions we had was, would a mobile library be eligible?
Most likely not, but we're willing to discuss it and find out more about the program. You're not allowed to acquire collections under this grant, and so it depends on what you want to do with the mobile library and how it addresses humanities programming. But we're not saying no, just give us more information and we will try to work with you on it. Next.
Okay, one of the other questions we had was, please just define the 501c3 status.
That is, if you have IRS recognition as a nonprofit organization, you'll have an IRS determination letter that you will need to attach to your grant application.
Okay, and then another question was, would receipt of passed down NEH money to a local arts agency disqualify you? So these were American Rescue Plan funds that were passed down, Karen?
Well, I think there's a simple answer to that. Check the document that is on our website that lists the people who receive funding under the NEH SHARP program, and that will give you that answer. But if they're passed down funds and not directly tied to it, not for the same project, I don't think it will impact you at all.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking. Okay, another question. Let's see. We have question about project costs. They want to fund currently unfunded activities. However, staff who work on this project are funded from NSF.
I'm not quite sure I understand the question.
Yeah, maybe Vanessa, go ahead.
So Lindy said that if you're funded by federal funds, you're ineligible for this project. Our staff are funded by National Science Foundation, but we want to fund unfunded activities with this
Right.
grant.
And let's be sure to clarify that. That's not what she said. She said that you can't have overlapping cost if you're receiving federal funds for the project, even if it's like a staff member that's federally funded, you would not be able to include them in this project grant. There can't be overlap on any funds. It's called double dipping. So all of the funds you request under this program have to be unique to it and not covered by another federal source.
And for example, staff, if this starts in February or March, they would have to be unfunded at that point in time, or they would have to never have been funded by federally funded grants.
They would have to be unfunded at that time with federal dollars.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Okay, another question. Jonathan asked, can funds cover indirect costs, overhead, F&A? Our institution almost always asks for this unless the funding agency specifically says they will not cover it.
Yes, and it's limited to 10%.
Okay, and then Annette asked, does having a current IMLS grant automatically disqualify our nonprofit organization?
Not at all. In fact, you probably are very much qualified for it. It's only, you can't use IMLS funds to fund any of these project expenses. Again, that would be considered double dipping by the federal government.
Okay, and Sonia asked, is there a requirement for an org building? We work to create tribal community engagement with archives in various locations. Sonia, do you mean you have multiple locations?
Yes, we are a recent 501c3. I'm talking about the California Native Research Institute, and it's Native led, and we have a number of board members and who have been working with tribes in various locations. And in order to connect people with archives, we do not have a central location. We do not have a building to open up, but we are very active in engaging tribal communities and others with archives in different places, and hoping to have some events, socially distanced perhaps, in the near future.
Sonia, do you mind if we talk about that? I think that you have some unique circumstances that we may need to explore with you.
Of course.
Closely. And I see that Lindy's back.
Perfect.
Welcome back, Lindy.
Thank you.
I am so sorry. This is the world we live in right now with this technology. I came to my office specifically so that I would have a good internet connection, so I have no idea what happened. So thank you all so much for your patience and flexibility. I will just pick up where we left off. So I think we were discussing examples of funding restrictions. Susan, can I get a thumbs up if that's where we left off?
I think so. And I just, yes.
Okay, great. I just want to make sure that I didn't skip anything. Okay, so travel is one of the ineligible expenses. Funds cannot be spent on construction, the purchase of real property, major alterations, and or renovation costs. Again, a cornerstone of this program is to engage the public with humanities. So as such, projects that are focused on the preservation, organization, or description of materials that are not regularly accessible for the public would not be considered eligible under this grant. So let's talk for a moment about our grantee responsibilities. As mentioned elsewhere, applications will receive a funding decision no later than January 31st of 2022. If you are one of the organizations selected for funding, you may begin your project on or after March 1st. There are several things that you will be responsible for as a grantee. First, the project must be completed between March 1st, 2022 and February 28th, 2023. During the project period, we request that you keep us apprised of any changes to the project or difficulties that you may be having. We are all working through this pandemic together, and we know that there may be changes to your project or your programming because of that. ATOM is unable to provide any extensions to the project timeframe under any circumstances. But again, if you are having issues or if problems arise with your project, we are here to help you find a workable solution. The important thing to keep in mind is just to keep those lines of communication open. Grantees will be responsible for attending virtual grantee meetings during the grant period. We will communicate to you when those meetings are with plenty of advance notice so that you can plan for those. As mentioned elsewhere, there will be a midterm report due on October 1st, 2022, and the final report on April 1st, 2023. And finally, because this program is federally funded, ATOM requires grantees to retain backup documentation and receipts for 3 years for auditing purposes. Successful grantees will keep accurate and complete records. Now I'm going to stop my share and we are going to navigate the website and application. So if you'll give me just a moment, I will get us there. Oops. Share the screen again. Okay. All right. So the first thing that you will want to do to access the application or any other resources for this program is to navigate to ATOM's website, which is simply www.atom.org. This is the main webpage for ATOM, but to get to the specific program website, you'll click this top link here under project announcements. So this is, again, the main page. Just scroll down a little bit and you want to click right here at the very top. That will take you to the program page. And this is where you can find all of the resources and additional information about the program, including all of the guidelines that we are reviewing now, a sample application, frequently asked questions, the budget form, program resources, and most importantly, the online application itself. So you can read through all of this stuff, but let's just focus for now on the application. So you'll go scroll down under application. You'll see 3 links here. The first link is a preview of the application, which I've got pulled up right here. We've included this so that you know the questions that you'll be asked and you can begin preparing your answers ahead of time. I always recommend beginning your application in another document, just copying and pasting these questions here into that document and answering them in Word or Google Docs so that you can actually just copy and paste when you go to put this into the online application. Here on the program page, again, you'll also see the budget form that you'll need for the application. So this is the required form that you should use for this application. Please do not use another one. Please do use the budget form here. It will be uploaded into the application, which I will show you momentarily. So there's 2 things that I want to cover regarding the budget. First, I want to cover the mechanics of the budget document. And then secondly, we'll go over the budget categories and talk about how to build out your budget. So at this point, it may be second nature to some, but I think it's always bears repeating because we've all had the PDF nightmares where we fill something out, save it just to reopen it and find all of our information is gone. And we don't want that to happen to you. So what you should do once you get here is click on the PDF of the budget form and open it in a new tab. Then make sure that you download the document and save it in the appropriate folder on your website or on your computer. And so you would name it whatever you want, and then click save. Because I've already got it saved, I'm not going to save it again, but we want to make sure you do that. So then it would pop up and you will go and open it in your PDF viewer, which would be Adobe. And if you don't have Adobe, you can download that for free. I would recommend just filling out a few items in the document as you've actually got it in Adobe Reader, and then save it, X out, and open it just to make sure that all of your work is being saved. That's just a good way to deal with PDFs, generally speaking. If you have any issues with the document, as always, just feel free to email us and I'll try to help work through that. So now let's actually take a look at the document, the budget document itself. So I'm going to share that through the PDF. So this is, I have downloaded the document, I have saved it, I know everything's working, and I can make changes to it. So this, the document that we're looking at now is the PDF of that is available on the website, and it's the application budget example. This form auto calculates the amounts that you plug in here at the very bottom. So all of this will be auto calculating under direct costs. And then when you add something in indirect costs, it'll calculate down here. So we'll go through this piece by piece. So the first funding categories is salaries and wages here at the top. You'll list the name of the person and or their title or position here. And the amount that you plan to pay them would go here in the middle. Any budget calculation notes would go here to the right. Any additional details about this request can be included in the budget narrative, which we'll cover next. But for the purposes of this document, any notes that succinct notes that you might want to include would be the hourly rate and anticipated number of hours worked for that individual. Fringe benefits, if you're requesting them, would go in part 2. These would be things like Social Security or Medicare tax liabilities that you'll be paying to the employees listed in the first part. So here in the left column, you would just list the salaries base and the rate of fringe, and then calculate that, put the amounts calculated here in the middle. And the notes on the right side here would be just listing what that item is. So here would be Social Security tax, and here is the Medicare tax. Part 3 asks you to list any consultants or contract laborers and the amount that you plan to pay them. If you know the individual's name or their title, please list it. And if you don't, you can just say, you know, the presenter or whatever they might be doing. Notes would include any brief details you would have about the dollar amount. So in this example, we've listed the number of presentations the individual would give and the amount that they'll be paid per presentation. Again, additional details about that can go in the budget narrative, which we'll cover in a moment. Supplies, materials, and equipment are listed here in part 4. As you can see, there are just 3 lines here, and more than likely, you'll be purchasing more than those 3 items. So what we recommend is summarizing those costs for supplies on one line and maybe materials on another and equipment on the other. Then in the budget narrative or justification, you can break down exactly how many widgets, gadgets, or gadgets that you're purchasing within that sort of sub-funding category. I do want to explain the difference between the equipment, supplies, and materials again. As we mentioned earlier in this presentation, the equipment is considered a single item that is $5,000 or more. Your application may not include equipment by those definitions. Any single item under $5,000 would be considered either materials or supplies. And just as a distinction, supplies are consumable items, something that would be used as part of the project, like basket reeds or hand sanitizer, where materials would be non-consumable items that still have a use after the project period, like a temperature thermometer or a document scanner, for example. Now, part 5 is other costs. So as much as possible, we have tried to provide categories of funding that are relevant to your request. However, there may be some costs that don't fit neatly into one of these other categories. In that case, you would just list those items here under number 5. The example I've included here is Zoom Business. It doesn't neatly fit into the other 4 categories, so we can just list it here, and the total amount. And then the budget calculation notes include how much it is per month and how many months we would be using it. So how we arrived at that number. Again, direct costs simply just all of the other 5 categories added up, and that will automatically calculate for you. If you are requesting indirect cost, you would list the direct cost amount times the indirect, the direct cost rate times your IDC rate, and that number would be listed here. And over here, you can just see how we've just made a note here that the 8% where it came from. So then that auto calculates here and here and here, and that is the budget. So now I will move on. I'm going to stop this share and go back to the budget justification. Excuse me. All right. So here's the budget justification example that we have. And again, this is available on the program website. While we don't have a required specific form that we want you to use for the budget justification, I do recommend following this as a basic format because it's very easy to follow, and it also parallels the budget, this budget document. So I would recommend starting a Word document or a Google document and just filling it out there and saving it as the PDF when you're done so that it can be uploaded to the application. So again, just start a Google Doc or Word doc, and for each funding category, you would include a simple title or heading here that parallels the budget in the same order that you see on the budget form. And we've just bolded and underlined it so it stands out, and that's a good way to do that. So then you would say X dollars in whatever that funding category is. So here we've requested $24,000 in salaries and wages, which again reflects what's on the budget. So then you have an opportunity to tell us a little bit more how you arrived at those dollar figures. And usually this is in sentence form, so you can see how we've done that here with all these different components. And here in the supplies, materials, and equipment, if you have some documentation of how you arrived at the cost for these materials, we welcome you to show us that. So for example, in this project that we made up for the purposes of having an example application here, we said, hey, we're going to purchase this lighting background and camera kit. And it came from this made up website. If you have something like that where you're saying, hey, we're buying these, whatever it is, this is the website that it came from, so that we can see that that's where you're, that's how you arrived at that. You're not just making up numbers. That would be really helpful. Again, we don't have a specific form that we want you to use, but this is a really helpful way to outline this document. And if you have any questions or ideas for other ways to do budget justifications, just feel free to email us at grants@atalm.com. So now we're going to take a look at the actual application. So to access the application itself, and the application must be submitted online through our form, you'll go back to the main program page, and under application, the middle link, online application, is what you'll want to click. That will take you to this page here. This page includes some more information about the funding opportunity. The budget template is also located here. It's exactly the same as the one that is on the main page. Either one of them can be downloaded. And to start your application submission, you'll click here where it says online. That will pull up this here, and you have an opportunity to either sign up or sign in. So if it's your very first time, you'll need to sign up. You'll just do that by including your email and creating a password and entering your first and last name. When you click sign up, you'll receive an automatic email that gives you a little bit more information about the sign up process, and then probably a link to click through the first time. So there's that. I do want to, actually, I'm going to take you, I have, since I've already signed in, I don't need to sign up again. So I would just, if I was going to do my work again, or revisit the application, I would go to that same link on the page, just click it here, and it'll pull it up where you can sign in again. So you just sign in here, and that should take you to the main page for your application. Now, I want to draw your attention to something real quick, because I recognized this when I was doing my first application. Here it says ends on December 14th, 2021. Applications are due December 13th at 11:59 p.m. Central Time. So for our East Coast or Eastern Time friends, ignore this. I just want to bring that to your attention, because I don't want you to accidentally miss out because this auto-corrected the time zone. So again, just remember that applications are due Monday, December 13th at 11:59 p.m. Central. Okay. So back to the process here. Thank you for bearing with me. I just don't want anybody to be confused about that. So signing in will take you directly to your application page, where you can fill in or work on the elements of your application. As I mentioned before, there's an example of the application as well as a list of the questions on the program's main web page, so you can see the questions ahead of time and begin preparing for those. I always encourage folks to start their application in Word and then just paste those answers into the appropriate fields. This application starts with the grant eligibility, and we've covered all that, so you'll just select the appropriate answer here, and then the questions for the application begin here with the represented tribe. The application is just one page, so you can see that here. As we scroll down, there's no second page or hidden pages somewhere that you have to fill out. Just scroll all the way down here. And then you'll see towards the bottom where you would begin uploading your documentation. Let's see here. Again, I just want to reiterate that the acceptable file types are PDFs, so make sure that you've saved everything as a PDF before uploading it. The certifying official would be the person to agree and list their name. This essentially serves as their signature, their electronic signature that they have agreed to submit this application. If you are still working through your application, you can save the draft by clicking this button. And if you're ready to submit, like super ready, you're done, it's ready to go, then you'll hit submit. Let's see here. I want to show you one more feature of this platform, which is right here at the very top. So if you are working with another member of your organization who wants to have access to this application and fill it out or work on it, you can invite them as a collaborator by clicking this. Well, that was anticlimactic. You just click up there where it says invite collaborators, and it will bring up this page, and then you will just enter the person's email and hit invite. That individual will receive an email that says you've been invited to collaborate on this application, and they click the link and it navigates them right to the application screen. They don't have to log in or anything. I don't believe that's how it happened when I tried it. So that is how you navigate the application online. So I want to go back to the main program page and show you just a few other resources that are available to you as you put your application together and begin thinking about your project. Again, here there's summary of the program, any key dates that are important for you to keep in mind, application information, including the project guidelines and frequently asked questions can be found right here. We've pretty exhaustively gone over the application documents themselves, like the preview, the online application that we were just looking at, and the budget form. And then sample application documents are here. This is where you would find a sample application that can help guide you on how to answer your questions, the sample budget, which we take a look at, as well as the sample budget justification. The funding webinar, that's what we're on right now, so that will disappear and probably be replaced with the replay of this. And then resources here. This is a wonderful document here, programming resources. This just is a great resource for you to look at different kinds of humanities-based projects that museums, libraries, and archives have put together. So we just want to provide that to you as you're thinking through different humanities-based projects or programs that your organization might look at doing. And then there's one final topic that I want to cover today, and that is the call for peer reviewers. Actually, before I go there, I do want to just back up. That list of NEH ARPA funded organizations that we were talking about earlier is right here. So if your organization is listed on this second document, the second link here under resources, then your organization would be ineligible for this grant program. So just wanted to call out exactly where you can find that list if you weren't able to access it in the chat earlier. So back to peer reviewers. All of the applications that are submitted will be reviewed and scored by 3 peer reviewers. ATOM is recruiting reviewers for this process and will provide a $500 stipend for reviewers. Now, individuals who are listed on the application, like the executive director, project director, employees of the organization, etc., would not be allowed to serve as reviewers. It would just be a conflict of interest. So likely most folks here on this webinar today wouldn't be eligible to be peer reviewers. But if you know someone who is, please send it along. Or if your organization decides not to submit for this, then we would love to have your help. Let's see here. So again, the peer reviewer application can be found here. And I think Melissa is also maybe putting that link in the chat. We do have a system in place to identify any conflicts of interest, so there shouldn't be any unfair advantage for any of our applicants. To the greatest extent possible, we will assign reviewers only to applications outside of their region or their state, and that will just help to mitigate those conflicts and create some space between reviewers and organizations. So with that, again, thank you everybody for being flexible with my technical difficulties, but we can open it up for any questions or answers. There were a few questions that were submitted to us at the time of registration, and Melissa and I will address those questions now, and then we'll open it up and address the bigger questions. So Melissa, if you want to take it away, we can.
Sure.
Thank you.
The first question is, can funds be used for construction, specifically adding on to an existing building?
The answer to that is unfortunately no. These funds cannot be used for construction, even if it's adding on to an existing building or an existing structure.
Okay, great. Can this grant be utilized to connect tribal members to archives?
Yes, absolutely. This is a perfect use of funding as long as it's publicly accessible and it's serving Native individuals. So creating opportunities for public engagement with your archives, libraries, or museums is a great use of these funds. You'll want to think about, though, the specific, measurable, and time-bound goals, and be sure that your program addresses that.
Okay, great. Can a single organization receive funding for more than one project?
No, a single entity cannot submit multiple grants. However, if a tribe, for example, has a distinct museum and a distinct library, each entity can submit an application, but it couldn't be 2 projects from the same museum, for example.
Okay, great. How important are letters of support?
Letters of support are not required, but they can strengthen your application by demonstrating how you partner or collaborate with organizations. However, if you are a non-tribal entity, you are required to submit a letter of commitment from the tribe you're partnering with, and that's under a separate attachment, a separate section in the application. And just to note, all components of the application are important, but your application will be evaluated as a whole.
Great. How many events can we host during the grant period?
You can hold as many events as is appropriate to complete the project. Just be sure that events are relevant to the project and that they are tied to humanities programming.
Great. Our organization received general ARPA funds. Can our organization apply for this subgrant program?
This is a great question. I know there's probably going to be some confusion. And if you still have answers or still have questions after I answer this, again, email us at grants@atalm.org. So ARPA, the ARPA, was an act of Congress that provided critical dollars to lots of organizations and companies across the US. Your organization may have received some funding from ARPA, but not specifically through the NEH program. And if this is the case where you got funding from ARPA from somewhere else, from some other agency, then yes, your organization would be eligible. However, if your organization received funding specifically from the National Endowment from the Humanities through their ARPA funds, then no, you would not be eligible. But I encourage you again to check that document on the website under resources there that includes the list of all the organizations that have received ARPA funds through NEH that would make your organization ineligible. So if you're not on that list, then you are eligible.
Great. And I just popped that link into the chat for everyone. Can grant funds be used to cover human resources staffing?
It's a great question. Any staffing for this project, whether it's employees or contractors, consultants, needs to be directly related to the humanities programming. So more than likely, if you're trying to ask for grant funds to cover like a human resource staffing cost, that would not be eligible. Indirect costs, however, if you are requesting those, could be used to pay for administrative costs and overhead.
Great. And final question, what constitutes a Native cultural institution with a 501c3 status?
Sure. I know we got a lot of questions about eligibility. And again, I encourage everybody, if you're still not clear after this webinar, reach out to us individually and we can talk through those things. But a Native cultural institution with a 501c3 status would be a nonprofit that's led by enrolled members of a tribal nation and whose work or mission focuses on promoting Native cultures or providing those services or humanities programs to Native individuals. So that's how that would be considered.
Okay, great. Well, I think I'm going to kind of go back and read some of the questions from the chat and we'll go from there. Okay, so one of the questions we have is, does the non-Native institution need to show hardship or the tribal entity or both?
Does the non-Native institution need to show my sense would be that as you're showing the idea here is you're demonstrating that COVID-19 has impacted your organization, and if you're a non-tribal entity, I would say just explain how COVID-19, how the pandemic has impacted both the tribe that you're serving or the tribes that you're serving, as well as the organization. Everybody's been impacted in one way or another. I don't think at this point any institution or any individual has gone completely unscathed from this pandemic. And so I would just encourage you to the greatest extent possible to explain how COVID-19, how the pandemic has impacted both the tribe that you're serving or tribal members that you're serving, as well as your organization, even if you're not a tribe yourself.
Great. Okay, and then someone had a question about kind of further explaining the difference between supplies and equipment.
Okay, this is a great question, and one that we've been working through too. So again, equipment is any item that is valued, that is $5,000 or more. So anything that's $5,000 or more would be, well, not anything, but most things that would, a single item that is $5,000 or more. A single item that is $5,000 or more would be considered equipment. If you're, I'm just going to use a scanner because I know that those can be really expensive. Some scanners are $5,000. If you had a particular scanner that was over $5,000, that would be equipment. That cost of equipment cannot exceed 20% of the grant request. Supplies and materials are items that are under $5,000. And the difference between supplies and materials are its sort of consumability. So a supplies is something that gets used, and then I kind of think about it as like used and then it disappears after the project. So basket reed, for example, it's a supplies. You use it to make the basket, and then it becomes a basket. It's no longer a supplies. Materials, on the other hand, are items that would continue to be used after the program period. So that could be a scanner that's under $5,000. So if your scanner is a $400 scanner, that would be a materials cost. So I hope that clarifies it a little bit more. So equipment is any item over $5,000. Supplies is something that you use during the project and then it kind of goes away because it no longer has that use. Materials would be something that you purchase under $5,000 and it has use after the project period.
Great. And if you guys, if you have any questions about you're unsure which is which, feel free to email us at the grants email and we can kind of talk that out.
Absolutely.
Okay. So the next question is in the FAQ.
Can I just add one thing about that? We're not going to hold it against you if you don't get that clear between what is a supply and what is a material. As long as your budget is reasonable and justified, you don't need to worry about differentiating between supplies and materials.
Thank you. Thanks.
Okay, so in the FAQ, it says that it does not cover expenses related to the preservation, description, and/or organization of items that are not regularly accessible for research. But then it says that digitization projects are allowable. However, some digitization projects require some additional description and preservation. Would this be allowable as part of the digitization process?
Go ahead, Melissa. You look.
Well, no, I mean, you go ahead.
Okay. I would want to know a little bit more about the project. So that would be one that whoever asked that question, thank you for the question. It's a great question. Reach out to us on our email and we can hop on a Zoom call or a phone call or just correspond that way to determine that. Susan, do you want to add to that?
I think the key there may be the accessibility because that's the qualifier on that. And I should explain that these are rules that are established by the National Endowment for the Humanities. And we know that they don't always fit with the programs that we as Native organizations have. But we will work with you to find the right solution on that. But I think that the key there is if it's accessible to the public or not.
And something that I just want to add to this, and it's something that Susan reminds us all the time. We want you to have these funds. The purpose of this is to give organizations that need funding to do humanities programs the funding that they need. So we aren't here to try to make this harder for you to access funds. We are here to help you find solutions and answers so that we can give you these funds. So just keep that in mind. I just want to, I think that that's something that Susan always reminds us. We're not here to make this harder. We're here to make this easier, in fact. So thanks for that question.
Okay, so one question we might just kind of go over again is, can two separate departments within the same organization apply?
I would want to know a little bit more about how you distinguish the department. So it would be something I would encourage you to, again, email us and we can talk about that. Because if maybe your library is considered one department and your museum is considered a different department. In that case, if they were two completely different departments doing two completely different things, then probably yes. But if it was our education department versus our cultural outreach department within the tribe, that might get a little messy. So let's just, reach out to us and I would love to discuss that with you a little bit more.
Okay. Can funds be used to create a digital archives?
Creating a total program I think if your digital archive was accessible to the public and you were doing public facing humanities programming that engaged lots of people, then it would probably be it would be an eligible activity. Susan, did you want to add to that? I saw you unmuting yourself.
No, that was perfect.
Okay, wonderful.
Okay, and can these funds assist with exhibit design?
Absolutely. I think so. As long as the exhibit is humanities based and it is there to engage the public, then that would be an eligible expense. My guess, without knowing more about your project, and again, please reach out to us. We can talk about that. My guess would be that if you're talking about project design, maybe you're thinking about hiring a consultant to help with that, and that would be eligible as long as the ultimate programming of this was a public-facing humanities project that engaged the public.
Perfect. Do we need a tribal resolution for the application if we are a tribal entity?
My understanding is that that might be more of a tribal policy. ATOM does not require any sort of resolution as part of the application to show that it was okay to submit that. But sometimes I know that tribes require that. We won't, they don't want they don't want people just out there applying for things on behalf of the tribe without the council's resolution or something. So I would say that's more of a tribal policy, and ATOM is not requiring that. However, the electronic signature on the application does say something to the extent of, we have explicitly been granted permission to submit this application by the authorizing official. So you certainly wouldn't want to submit that without making sure that the powers that be have given their blessing to it.
Great. Can interviews with tribal elders with the results leading to a publication and museum exhibit be done under this grant? I believe so. I would want to talk more a little bit about each of the program elements to make sure that they're meeting all of the guidelines, but just very generally speaking, that sounds like it would be an eligible project. Okay. And then can NEH funds be used to create cultural components within a natural history ecosystem exhibit funded by other IMLS funds?
I believe the answer to that would be no, because a project, these funds can, there cannot be overlapping costs of a project with other federal funds. So my general sense with that is no. If you have more specific questions or maybe some more explanation to give that some depth, please email us and we can talk through that. But if you've already got federal funding for a project, these funds would not be able to be matched, overlap with that same project.
And then someone asked if this presentation and everything will be available at a later date. Yes, we will have this loaded within 24 hours. You'll have the recording as well as a copy of the PowerPoint on our website. Okay, so can a library that primarily serves natives meet the eligibility requirement? We are not a public library in our state system, but a programmatic library.
Could you repeat the question part of the?
So can a library that primarily serves natives meet the eligibility requirement?
I would think so. I would like for that individual to email us and talk a little bit more about that, just to give it some depth. If we could just, if you would email us, I would love to talk to you a little bit more about your project, but I think so. It doesn't, your library doesn't need to be a part of the state library system in order to be eligible for this.
It does not. It needs to serve Native people though.
And it sounds like
and the project needs to be related to a tribal entity.
In humanities programming, yeah.
Okay, great. So someone said, so we're asked, for those of us who have a higher indirect cost rate and decide to absorb the difference that is not affordable through this grant, how do you want us to notate that on the grant budget form, since it will still be part of the overall budget? Susan, you might.
Yeah, that it does not need to be part of the budget. That's an internal budgeting decision that you'll be making. And we don't need to have that reflected in the budget. I'm sorry about the 10% cap, but that's
Any
the way it is.
Mhm. Okay, and so then the other question, we are a non-Indigenous university library that supports a unique public-facing program that directly serves Indigenous communities and healthcare workers on tribal land. We have an advisory council that is comprised in part of Indigenous people. Would we be eligible?
From that description, I believe so. I, again, would encourage you to email us, set up a consultation just to make sure that you meet those eligibility requirements. But from what you were, from the description that Melissa read, I believe that that would be an eligible entity.
As long as it has an eligible project that's humanities related.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So what range of percentage does ATOM allow for salary? Is preference given to applicants that prioritize employees over consultants?
We don't have any policies or priorities in place, and there's no peer review directives on that. So I don't want to, again, they will be judged as a whole. And so we don't want to say, oh my gosh, there are exorbitant amounts of staff costs on this budget, that we don't like that. That's not what this is. And again, remember that the purpose of this, the design of this program was to specifically address those needs of organizations that have been harmed by the pandemic, and that includes rehiring staff, et cetera. So there's no real distinction between, oh, we want you, we want 50% of your people budget going to employees and only 20% to consultants. We don't have anything like that. That's not part of this.
Okay, great. All right, that was the last question. So.
All right. And as always, we encourage everybody to please just email us with any questions. Again, we are here. We want to give you this. We want you to have great projects that that help the folks in your communities as they are recovering from this pandemic. Feel free to email us and ask any other questions, and we're happy to review drafts until December 9th.
Just somebody quickly ask a question. Melissa, what was that last question?
Yeah, so we just had a question on, will the peer review criteria be available to applicants? And that information is actually can be found under the project guidelines towards the end on page 3. You'll see the questions that the committee will be reviewing or looking at when looking at your application.
Great. Good job, Lindy.
Yes, great job.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Anything else?
Good.
All right.
Well, we're here to help you. So if you have questions, just don't hesitate to ask, and we try to get back to you right away. As Lindy said, we're happy to review your application to provide guidance. Our goal is to get you funded. So just don't hesitate to ask. I'll turn it back to Lindy.
I think that's it. I hope everybody has a wonderful day. Send us your questions. We're really excited to see the great projects that your organizations develop through this funding. It's going to be wonderful, and we're excited for that.
All right.